evening, everybody. It's Coach Lee here, and I thought before you go to sleep, let me, have a bit of a conversation with you over your phone. Thank you so much for allowing me this small little time. I was meditating this evening, and I thought, you know what? Let me actually share what God is saying about about His word. And I am reading from Genesis 45, from verse 1 up until verse 20. I'm not going to read everything, but I'm going to take parts of it which are important. I urge you to go read the full story so that you can get the full context as well. But just to put it back, this is the story about Joseph, and most of the time in Joseph's story, there is a bigger focus on, the pit, his brothers throwing him in the pit, him being sold to slavery, and then him, being falsely accused and all of that. And if you look at the full story, not once does the scripture say that he cried, right? And then you get to verse 45, to chapter 45, verse 1. And you must remember this just before this happened, he was giving his brothers a little bit of extra money and, putting extra grain and all of that before this happened. So I'm going to read a little bit from verse 1, and we're going to jump around a bit. But I'm highlighting these ones because these are the pivotal moments, according to me, in the story. So from verse 1, it says, "Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, 'Make everyone go out from me.' So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, so that Egypt heard it. And the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?' But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence." So I'm going to pause it there for a bit. So he could no longer control himself, and he started crying. And he tried to contain himself, which is why he asked, people to leave so that he can be alone with his brothers. But because that is the time when the penny dropped in his head, when his thoughts realized, and I probably think this is where his whole life flashed in his eyes, and he was like, "Oh my word. So this is why I had to go through all this suffering." It made sense. And he cried aloud. He tried to contain himself, but he cried so loud that the whole of Egypt heard him, and Pharaoh's house heard him, because he was overcome with emotions. And you must realize that his brothers were ashamed, and they didn't even know how to react in front of him, because they remembered what they did to him. I'm going to go a little bit further. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near me, please." And they came near him. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." That is verse 4 and 5. So this is where he assures them that don't blame yourself for treating me badly. Don't blame yourself for what you did. Because God used what you did for evil. And He literally made it for good. And this is where He's making it known. And that's why He was crying so deeply, because it hit Him why He had suffered so much. He needed to go through what He needed to go through so that He can be at that point in the time where there was famine in the land, and He was literally the Lord of all of Egypt, and He was father to Pharaoh. Had they not put Him in the pit, had He not gone to Egypt as a slave, had He not worked in Potiphar's house, had He had not been in jail, He wouldn't have been able to be standing in front of them right there and then to preserve their life. I want you to take a minute to let that sink in. Sometimes we go through suffering, not just for ourselves, but those around us. Sometimes we go through suffering, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. And when we go through that suffering, we are unaware of the magnitude of blessings it will bring to others, not just to us. But when we're going through that dark time, we are unable to see the future. So at this point in time in Joseph's life, the penny dropped that God sent him before them so that He can preserve life. Their life, their wives' lives, the children's lives, their children's children, the whole of Israel. And this is how big this is. A whole nation was preserved from poverty by one man's suffering. One man's suffering. I want that to sink in for a bit. One man's suffering because of a squabble he had in a dysfunctional family where there was hatred by his own brothers who sold him into slavery. God used that pain, that story, to preserve life. A whole nation's life. And you are sitting there today going through your suffering thinking it's for you alone. No, it's not. You are in that suffering so that you can preserve life. Right now, you don't even know whose life you're going to be preserving. But while you're enduring your hardship, know that your hardship is there to save somebody else's life. And that brings me back to the story of Jesus, that He went through suffering to save the human race. But the story of Joseph was kind of showing us what is to come. And sometimes what we are going through as well is almost a repetition, but we are saving the people close to us, and who knows, one day there'll be life, one day it'll be a nation. Same as what Nelson Mandela went through. And all those people that were fighting, slaves who were fighting, they went through their suffering so that we can have the life that we have right now. So that is the magnitude of what God has placed in your suffering, the blessing that is in your suffering. I want to go back to the scripture. Verse 11 says, "There I will provide for you, for there will be yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty." Right? Verse 14, it says, "Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and he wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked to him." So can you imagine what his brothers said after that? They don't tell us in the scripture what they said. But if Benjamin was crying, it must have been everybody who was crying after the realization of the magnitude of why this one brother had gone through suffering. And he told them when he was younger that you guys are literally going to be bowing down to me. And because of jealousy, they threw him out. They sold him to slavery. But little did they know that God is going to use his story to turn it around. I'm going to go back to the scripture. Verse 16 says, "When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brother have come. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants." I'm going to jump and go to verse 20, and it says, "Have no concern." This is now Pharaoh talking to Joseph's brothers. He says, "Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." So basically he told them, leave everything that you ever thought you owned. Leave it. Just bring your family, bring your father. You guys will live in the land. Everything that is the good of this land will be yours. So all the suffering, all the pain, everything that they had endured, the famine, don't worry. Come. You will be taken care of. Your family may persecute you. Your friends may not understand you. Your own family may not understand why you are holding on to this dream, and sometimes why you're going through the suffering. But in due time, you will be saving and preserving life. And making sure that people don't go through poverty. And you will be blessed immensely for that. I want to encourage you today. Whatever pain you're feeling, whatever suffering you're going through at this point, may not make sense. Sometimes you feel like giving up. Sometimes you just don't want to wake up because it gets so hard. It gets so hard that you just want to sit on the couch, have a big blanket, not talk to anybody, and shut out the world because you're going through so much turmoil. But my brother, my sister, you are going through that suffering to preserve life. You are going through your suffering to alleviate poverty, not just for yourself, but for those around you. And maybe even a nation. So stay strong, stay firm. One day those tears will be tears of joy when you sit and realize, oh my God, is this why I had to go through that? So that I can be this and save them? It's a ripple effect. Your blessings are just not yours alone. Just as your pain is not just yours alone. Thank you for taking time to listen to this. Be blessed. Be inspired. Be strengthened by what you heard here today. And thank God that you're still alive. That you are still here to tell a story of your suffering that will one day turn into joy. I'm Coach Lee. Have yourselves a beautiful evening.